Chapter 23, The Eighth Dwarf. A horrible storm moved through the dwarf forest. Rain poured down in massive amounts. Trees bent in the violent wind, and thunder roared across the land. It was as if Mother Nature was mourning. The 7 dwarfs were nestled warmly in their cottage. They played a game of cards and enjoyed some hot cocoa at their table while they waited out the storm. It was almost midnight when an unexpected knock came from their door. The dwarfs were very curious as to who would be visiting them so late in the night during such a harsh storm. In fact, the last person to knock on their door had been Queen Snow White herself when she was just a young princess trying to hide from the evil queen. The oldest dwarf stood from the table and opened the door. He was taken aback by whom their guest turned out to be. Standing on their doorstep, soaked to the bone in a dark cloak, was the 7 dwarfs' youngest brother. "Hello," Rumpelstiltskin said. "Well, I'll be an elf's mistress," the oldest dwarf said. It had been 127 years since the dwarfs had seen their youngest brother. "Rumpelstiltskin, is that you?" said the shortest dwarf, and he stood from the table. "It's me, brother," Rumpelstiltskin said. "May I come in?" The oldest hesitated at first, but because the weather was so horrid, he decided it would be cruel of him not to let his brother in. Rumpelstiltskin took a step inside his old home, and the oldest shut the door behind him. "It's a beast out there," he said with a shiver. All 7 of his brothers scowled at him, not welcoming his return home. "Playing with the old deck, I see. I always loved it when we played cards through a storm." His brothers stared at the floor or at their hands of cards, although none of them were playing any more. "I saw the smoke from your chimney," Rumpelstiltskin said. "It guided me through the storm. Thank goodness it did, otherwise I'd still be out there trotting through the rain." "Why are you here?" the largest dwarf asked him. Rumpelstiltskin looked at his hands while he formed the words. "I snuck away while the Enchantress was out. I'm sure you've heard, but she is taking over the world," he said. The oldest dwarf hooted under his breath in disgust and had a seat at the table. Rumpelstiltskin knew it was aimed at him. "She isn't very clear about her plans for the dwarf forest, and it has no ruler to conquer, but I think she's planning on obliterating them completely," he said. "I'm fairly close to her, as close as anyone could be, and was hoping with your permission I could ask her to spare you when she takes over." "And why would you do that?" asked the thinnest dwarf. Rumpelstiltskin was hurt he had to be asked. "Because we're family," he said. The oldest angrily threw his cards on the table. "We were family," he said. "You abandoned this family a long time ago, when you decided we weren't good enough for you. And what did you leave us for? To kidnap children for evil fairies, to spend a lifetime in prison? How dare you call yourself a dwarf, or say the word family under this roof? Mother and father would be ashamed of you if they were still alive." Rumpelstiltskin lowered his head. "I was so unhappy," he said. "I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew it wasn't the life of a miner." "So have you found it then?" the shortest dwarf asked. "Is running around doing the evil Enchantress's grunt work been everything you were hoping for?" Rumpelstiltskin closed his eyes. He was hoping the conversation wouldn't get to this. "I'm sorry for the embarrassment I brought to this family," he said. "And believe me, not a day goes by that I don't wish to erase the past. I would love nothing more than get rid of my affiliation with her. But I'm afraid I can't, all because one mistake I made years ago." The oldest dwarf shuffled his cards. "Well, if it was your mistake and not ours," he said, "we'll have nothing to do with it. You can tell the Enchantress that we'd rather die than live in a world ruled by her." Rumpelstiltskin looked at his other brother, but the answer seemed to be unanimous. "I see," he said. "Well, at least I tried." He headed to the door and pulled it open. The strong winds from outside instantly filled the cottage. Rumpelstiltskin turned back to his brothers before he left. He had one final thing to say. "I'm sorry I can never be the brother you wanted," Rumpelstiltskin said. "But one day I'll make things right between us. One day I'll be a brother you can be proud of." Rumpelstiltskin stepped into the storm and shut the cottage door behind him, knowing it could very well be the last thing he ever said to them. Chapter 24, The Lady of the East. The twins followed the ghost for hours and hours across the land. They traveled through a series of forests, over streams, and across grassy hills as they voyaged farther and farther, following the spirit into the east. Occasionally, the ghost would look back at the twins to make sure they were still following her and wait for them to catch up before proceeding. Eventually, they arrived at a large river that marked the Eastern Kingdom's border. At least the twins assumed it was the border, since everything on the opposite side was consumed in thorn bushes and vines. "She's crazy if she thinks we're going in there," Connor said. The Lady of the East floated upstream to a large maple tree. She lingered by its roots until the twins met her there. She pointed to the ground, and the twins saw a small circular door hidden in the dirt. Connor pulled it open and discovered a ladder leading down into a narrow tunnel. "It's a secret passage!" Alex said. "Are we supposed to go in there?" Connor asked the ghost. The Lady of the East slowly nodded her head. She retracted into a small ghostly orb and flew into the passage. Alex and Connor followed her, cautiously making their way down the ladder. The tunnel was dark and dingy. The orb gave off the only light, and the twins followed it like the North Star, as it continued leading them east underground. The dirt surrounding them became moist and muddy as they traveled below the river. "She seems to know where she's going," Connor said. "There must be a secret entrance into the Eastern Kingdom," Alex said. "Something tells me we're the only ones who have been here for a very long time." There was no footprints or a single insect or rodent in sight. The twins were led through the tunnels for miles and miles. Their feet grew tired and ached a little more with every step. "Are we there yet?" Connor asked the orb, but he didn't get an answer. Finally, the tunnel came to an end at another ladder. Alex and Connor climbed up the ladder and peeked through another circular door above it. They pushed the door open and climbed out of the passage. The twins found themselves in a square room with hay covering the ground and spacious wooden stalls built around the walls. "Looks like we're in a stable," Connor said. "Then where are all the horses?" Alex asked. The orb expanded back into the Lady of the East. She glided across the stable and through a pair of open wooden doors. Alex and Connor followed her again. Peering through the doors before walking through them, they found a stone spiral staircase that twisted high above them. "Connor, I think we're in Sleeping Beauty's castle," Alex said. The Lady of the East glared at them from the stairs. We're coming," Connor said. The twins followed the ghost up the stone steps, climbing higher and higher into the castle. They finally reached one of the highest floors and followed the Lady of the East down a hallway with stained glass windows. The windows were dark, though, as if something was covering them from the other side. They passed a window with an unobstructed view and looked out at the rest of the castle and the land surrounding it. Alex shrieked and grabbed her brother's arm. "Oh my gosh!" she said and covered her mouth. "Whoa!" Connor said under his breath. The castle was so consumed by the Enchantress's plants it looked like it was on one large plant itself. The thorn bushes and vines had wrapped around the castle, leaving nothing uncovered. The twins saw soldiers and servants and villagers spread across the land with vines coiled around them like serpents covering their prey. Some were pinned to the ground, while others were suspended hundreds of feet in the air over the castle, like ornaments on a monstrous Christmas tree. "You don't see something like that every day," Connor said softly. The twins turned to the Lady of the East. She floated farther down the hall and phased through a door. Alex and Connor opened the door and walked into the room, but the ghost had vanished. They looked around at the room they had just entered, and a large, luxurious four-poster bed pushed against the wall caught their eye. They were in the King and Queen's chambers. "Who are you?" a deep voice called out. King Chase was seated by a fireplace, keeping warm. The twins jumped when they saw him. "So sorry to disturb you," Alex said. "We didn't realize we were walking into your private chambers." The king studied them curiously. "How did you get into the castle?" he asked. "We were following someone," Alex said. "Who?" King Chase asked. Neither of the twins had an answer. "Well, we're not sure who she is exactly," Alex said. "A pushy ghost, that's who," Connor said under his breath. "She led us through a secret tunnel." The twins expected the king to look at them like they were crazy, but he did the opposite. "A ghost?" King Chase said. Is this ghost by chance the spirit of a woman with a flower in her hair? Yes, Alex said. Do you know who she is? King Chase nodded. You must be following the ghost of old Queen Beauty. She's been haunting this castle for years. Queen Beauty? Connor asked with a confused face. We just saw your wife last week. She's alive. King Chase rested his head on the back of his chair and let out a long sigh of relief. I am glad to hear that, he said. I haven't seen or heard from her since she fled the castle. No one has been able to get in or out since the plants attacked. So there are two Queen Beauties? Connor asked. King Chase stood and walked to a portrait on the wall. It was of a beautiful woman, unmistakably the Lady of the East when she had been alive. The ghost is the spirit of my wife's grandmother, Queen Beauty the First, who she was named after, King Chase explained. Historically speaking, my wife is Queen Beauty the Second. The world just knows her as Sleeping Beauty. That's why she looks so familiar, Connor said. Sleeping Beauty just looks like her grandmother. The ghost only reveals herself to people she thinks can help in a time of need, King Chase said and eyed the twins. I should know. I would have never kissed Sleeping Beauty and broken the sleeping curse if Queen Beauty hadn't been there to guide me to this castle. Interesting, Alex said and studied the portrait. Beside it was another painting of Queen Beauty standing next to a large animal of some kind. It had thick fur, large claws, and a mane like a lion's. Wait a second. Beauty, Alex thought. Is old Queen Beauty the Beauty from the story of Beauty and the Beast? Indeed, said a woman's voice. The twins and King Chase turned to see the ghost of old Queen Beauty floating towards them. I came to live in the castle when I was a very young woman. I was meant to settle my father's debt with a king cursed to live as a hideous beast. But when I found love with him, the curse was lifted and he became human again. The twins froze. You can talk? Connor asked. Might have been nice if you explained some of this the first time you scared the crap out of us. I apologize for my methods getting you here, Beauty said. I can only speak when I am in my old house. Alex was fascinated by the heritage and silently thought on it, trying to make sense of it all. So there were two curses in this castle broken by an act of love, Alex said. What a coincidence. That is not a coincidence at all, I'm afraid, Beauty said. The curses were cast by the same person, Esmea. Both the twins shook their head in disbelief. They weren't expecting this twist in the story. Hold on, Connor said. Esmea is the one who turned your husband into the beast? The ghost nodded somberly. Yes, she said. You see, Esmea found love with my husband long before I met him. When he could not reciprocate of her love, she cursed him, thinking no one could ever love a beast. And then you broke the spell, and years later she cursed your granddaughter, Alex asked. Guess she didn't like the name Beauty, Connor said with a shrug. The Enchantress has cursed every generation of my family, Beauty told them. She bewitched my son into desiring a wife who could spin hay into gold. He eventually found a maiden who claimed to do so, but only because she made a deal with Rumpelstiltskin to do it for her. And Rumpelstiltskin was working for Esmea at the time, Connor said, piecing everything together. He spun the hay into gold in exchange for her firstborn child. Wait! There's a theme in Esmea's attack on your family, Alex said. They all involve a spinning wheel, but why? Before I came to live in the castle with the beast, my sister and I spun thread in the village nearby, Beauty said. Esmea couldn't stand for the fact that my husband chose to love a spinner rather than a great fairy like herself. She had forced the spinning wheel upon my family since. That takes a lot of effort, Connor said. Why would she put so much energy into cursing her family because of something that happened so long ago? The twins could almost see a small smile appear on the ghost's face. The twins were following her story perfectly. Because the Enchantress, above all things, values her pride, Beauty said, and my family has always been a reminder of Esmea's greatest loss and embarrassment. The twins felt their hearts skip a beat. Her pride! Alex said, That's it! That's the Enchantress's most prized possession! That's why you brought us here, isn't it? Connor asked Beauty. You knew what we needed. The ghost of old Queen Beauty nodded again. King Chase was just caught up in her stories as the twins were, still learning things about the family he married into. "I have a question," King Chase said. "Is that why you haunt this castle still? Because you're protecting your family against the Enchantress?" The ghost dismally lowered her head. "In her scheme to take over the world, the Enchantress imprisoned my husband's soul just as she has your grandmother," Beauty said to the twins. "I've walked the earth waiting for his soul to be free so I could be reunited with him on the other side." "What's up with all the souls?" Connor asked. "Can't she collect stamps or antiques like a normal person?" "I'm afraid I don't have the answers to that question," Beauty said, "but I've asked someone who will join us." The ghost of old Queen Beauty gestured behind them to the fireplace. Another spirit stepped out from the smoke of the tiny flames. It was the ghost of a short woman who wore a hooded cloak and walked hunched over with a cane. Her face was so wrinkled she looked like a log. She had an incredibly small nose with an enormous mole next to it. The twins knew who she was without any introduction. Their father had described her perfectly in the journal they followed a year ago. "Hagatha," Alex asked, "is that you?" "Aye," Hagatha said, and slowly made her way closer to them. "Do you know why the Enchantress is collecting souls?" Connor cautiously asked her. "Aye," Hagatha said. "It's what she needs to create a portal into the other world." "What?" Alex asked breathlessly. "What do you mean, the other world?" "The Enchantress never wanted just this world. She's always planned on taking over the other world as well," Hagatha said. "It's her home. It's where she was born. It's where her family was killed." The twins couldn't believe what they were hearing. As if the stakes weren't high enough already, learning that the Enchantress wanted to take over their world too made them sick to their stomachs. Their quest suddenly became a mission to save 2 worlds. The mayhem she could cause in the other world would be catastrophic compared to the havoc she has committed here. "But our grandmother is the only person who can travel between worlds," Alex said. Hagatha and Beauty exchanged a remorseful look. "There is another way," Hagatha said. "It's something I learned when I was a young witch. It was such an extreme spell I never thought anyone would be crazy enough to attempt it. Till I met Esmea." "And you gave it to her?" Alex asked. "I met her when she was still a fairy in good standing," Hagatha said in her own defense. "She had been heartbroken a number of times and asked if I knew how to create a portal so she could go home to the other world. And not thinking much of it, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I told her." "What was it?" Connor asked. Hagatha let out a long sigh. "To travel into the other world, you must first master the 7 deadly sins of this world and conquer its past, present, and future," she said. It was the most intense collecting spell the twins had ever heard of. "She has to master the 7 deadly sins?" Alex asked. "And conquer the world's past, present, and future," Connor said. "How does someone do that?" "Esmea has spent a long time figuring it out, and unfortunately she's very close to completing it," Hagatha said. "What are the 7 deadly sins again?" Connor asked his sister. Alex had to think about it. Lust, envy, pride, greed, gluttony, sloth, and wrath, I believe, she said. Connor gulped. "Sounds like the Enchantress, all right," he said. "And you said she's close to accomplishing all of that, Hagatha?" The ghost of the old witch nodded. "Esmea has imprisoned the souls of her former loves to signify her lust. She strips others of their happiness to signify her envy. Having Rumpelstiltskin under her command connotes her sloth. And as she slowly takes over the world with greed and gluttony, the world is exposed to the Enchantress's wrath, satisfying her pride," Hagatha said. "But how is she conquering the world's past, present, and future?" Alex asked. "By destroying the kingdom's historical landmarks. The Enchantress conquers the past," Hagatha explained. "By forcing the rulers to hand over their thrones willingly, Esmea undeniably holds the power over the present. And by kidnapping the heir to a throne of a man and the heir to a throne of magic, she encompasses the future." The twins bobbed their heads up and down as they followed along. They looked to King Chase, but he was having an even harder time comprehending it all. Every move Esmea had made from the very beginning had been carefully calculated. Princess Hope is the heir to a throne of man, Connor said. That's why Esme kidnapped her and tried kidnapping Sleeping Beauty as a baby. But who is the heir to the throne of magic? Alex asked. That is where the Enchantress has made her greatest mistake, Hagatha said, happy to tell them about one advantage they had over the Enchantress. She has taken the wrong person. The twins didn't understand what she was telling them at first. Connor looked to his sister as if it was slowly dawning on him. Alex realized everyone in the room was looking at her. Me? Alex asked and pointed to herself. That's why the Enchantress wanted to kidnap me. She thinks I'm sort of heir to magic? Technically, you are the fairy godmother's only heir, Connor said. You're her grandchild too, Alex reminded him. Shouldn't you qualify as much as me? Connor shook his head. Come on, Alex, he said. You know I've never wanted to be a fairy. This has always been your thing. Alex shook her head and looked to the floor, not wanting to believe it. No, there has to be some sort of mistake, she said. I want to be a fairy as much as the next girl, but I can't be the next fairy godmother. Didn't the unicorns bow to you when you came to this world? Beauty asked. Well, yes, but what does that have to do with anything? Alex asked. The unicorns only bow to those that magic is strong with, Hagatha said. Esmea knew that if anyone can stop her, it would be another woman of both worlds with magic in her blood. Which is why Grandma made such a big deal about protecting us, Connor said. She knew Esmea would be coming after you. I bet she's known you were going to fill her shoes since you activated her Land of Stories book. Alex kept trying to deny it to herself, but what were they saying was making sense. It was such a huge reality to face, but an even bigger burden to bear. Had the situation been different, it would have been the most wonderful news she had ever heard in her life. But they were talking as if she was now single-handedly responsible for defeating the Enchantress. You have to get back to the others, said another voice in the room. They all turned to see a third ghost appear. She was young and pretty, but shy and kept her distance. There was something about her presence and her voice that was so familiar to the twins, but they had so many things to think about, they couldn't think exactly who she reminded them of. This room is getting more crowded by the minute, Connor said. Who are you? The new ghost took a moment to answer, as if she wanted to remain anonymous. They called me Gloria when I was alive, she said, but quickly changed the subject. You've been gone for hours, and your friends have started to worry. The Enchantress is planning another attack soon. You must return to them and finish building the wand. Wait, how do you know about the wand? Connor asked. The ghost of Gloria went quiet. I know you are much closer to finishing it than you think, she said softly, almost sad to say it. Now you must hurry. Esme is planning to strike very soon. She's right, Beauty said. She floated past the twins and headed to the door. It's time you head back to the troll and goblin camp. The twins nodded, not wanting to cause Bob and the others to worry any more than they already had. Children, King Chase said before they left his room, if you see my wife, please tell her I love her. No, Connor said, but you can tell her yourself when you see her next. He and King Chase shared a hopeful smile. Best of luck to you both, the king said. The twins followed the ghost of old Queen Beauty out of the room. She escorted them down the spiral staircase, through the stables, and into the secret passage. The twins ran down through the tunnel as far as they could, reaching the other ladder in half the time it took them to get there. They quickly hurried through the trees, over the streams, and across the hills, and finally reached the woods alongside the campsite as the sun began to rise. They turned back to the ghost of the old Queen Beauty. Thank you, Alex said. You helped us so much. The ghost silently nodded her head and then disappeared. They could tell she was just as grateful to them as they were to her. The twins ran through the campsite and found Bob and Froggy sitting at the campfire outside the tent. That was the longest walk I've ever heard of, Bob exclaimed when he saw them. Where have you been? We were worried sick, Froggy said and leaped to his feet. We were in the Eastern Kingdom, Connor panted. We have so much to tell you guys. Alex looked around. Where is everyone, anyways? She asked. Froggy and Bob looked to each other with sorrowful eyes. The twins instantly knew something bad had happened while they were gone. What's wrong? Connor asked. Froggy didn't know how to explain. Come, have a look for yourselves, he said. He led the twins inside the tent. Inside, the twins saw Jack kneeling sadly on the ground. Goldilocks was standing at his side, gently rubbing his back. Red sat next to Jack and cuddled Claudius tightly in her arms. What happened? Alex asked. It's the harp, Goldilocks said. She's gone. What do you mean she's gone? Connor asked. She's part of the wand now, Jack said. We came into the tent and found it like this. Jack was clenching the wand of wonderment. It had a shiny new gold tint to it now, the exact shade of the harp. Red used part of Goldilocks' coat as a handkerchief to blow her nose. Poor dear, she said. I suppose the singer has taken her final bow. I never thought we would lose her completely to it, Jack said, fighting back the emotion that suddenly rushed through him. I wish we could have had more time to figure out a better way. Connor and Alex looked to each other and knew exactly what the other was thinking. Gloria, Connor whispered to Alex. The harp's name was Gloria. Alex watched over her sad friends and took a step towards them, deciding now was the best time to tell them what they had learned from the spirits in the Sleeping Beauty's castle. The harp's loss won't be in vain, she said. We finally know what we need to defeat the Enchantress.